Hello and welcome to the Working Better Together, How to Manage Sub-Awards and Sub-Recipients. My name is Jamil Evans with the OJP TFSC. And before we begin, there are a few announcements I would like to make. This live discussion webinar is being hosted by the OJP or the Office for Justice Programs. If you have any technical issues during this session, please contact Jamil Evans in the chat or just email ojptfsc@usdoj.gov. You can access the informational brochure and the FAQs with the links provided in the chat. And to ask a question during the session, please use the chat box to the right-hand side of your Zoom screen. And so right now, I'm just going to ask, what's the last thing you had for breakfast? And also, in order to have the most accurate attendance for the session, please tell us in the chat box the number of people joining you on the session, including yourself. All right. See if we got some messages coming in. Great. Okay. So everything except the Q&A session, the Q&A discussion will be recorded today, and live captions will be available during the session. Since your feedback is so important to us, at the end of the webinar, we will provide a link to our survey. Before we begin, let's go over a couple of Zoom tips. On the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you see a microphone icon. You just click that icon to unmute yourself. You click it again, and we see a red slash. That's how you know you're muted. If you're dialed in over the phone, you can unmute your line by dialing *6, and that's how you know you're muted. If you are not speaking today, please ensure you mute yourself just to avoid any background noise or interruptions. To the right-hand side of the microphone icon, you see a video icon. You just click that to start your video. You click it again, you see the red slash. That's how you know your video is off. To the right of those icons, you see a chat icon. You click that to open your Zoom window. You can communicate with everyone on the platform today with that. You can also send private messages by clicking the drop-down menu item in your chat, and you can select whoever you want to send a private message to. You can also change your viewing experience. So on the top right-hand side of your screen, you see a little grid icon. So you can click that to go to speaker view. This is where you can see everyone who's speaking on the platform today, or you can go with gallery view. So let's meet today's presenters. Our first presenter is Crystal McNeil-Wright. She's an associate CFO for the Advanced Financial Management Division in the Office for Justice Programs, and she brings more than 30 years of leadership and management experience. Crystal is also a published author of a book on parenting. Today, we'll also have Michael Williams. Michael is a staff accountant trainer for the Evaluation and Oversight Branch in the Grants Financial Management Division. Mr. Williams brings more than 20 years of accounting and financial management experience to the position. Today, we'll also have Carlin Hertz. Carlin is a financial specialist for the OJP TFSC, serving the American Samoa, Northern Mariana Islands, Guam, and the US Virgin Islands. Also joining us today is Russ Bermejo. Russ is a senior training and technical assistance specialist for the OJP TFSC. Last, but certainly not least, is Francis Mendez. Francis, he's a project director for the OJP TFSC, and Francis has a background in law, social work, and business administration. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Crystal McNeil-Wright.
Good morning. Thank you, Jamil, for that wonderful introduction of all the presenters. Again, my name is Crystal McNeil-Wright. I am the Associate CFO of the Grants Financial Management Division within OJP. We're so excited to have you with us this morning. We are very excited as well to present what we have and the materials that we have to assist you with better administration of your grants. So today we'll be going over a presentation about oversight and responsibilities for your subrecipients, and we'll follow that with a Q&A. So you'll be able to ask any questions that you have, anything that has been burning and you haven't had an opportunity to address, you can certainly ask it here. We'll go through some case scenario activities and do a Q&A there. It's going to be a great time to get into groups and be able to have some open discussion. We'll also do a Q&A and open discussion where, again, more questions can be asked. And then we'll go over some closing remarks and discuss next steps. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Williams. He is a staff accountant within the Grants Financial Management Division at OJP, who will be doing this presentation for you today. So enjoy.
Good morning, and thank you, Crystal. Just want to say good morning and welcome to everyone that has logged in today for this particular presentation. Again, my name is Michael Williams, and I'll be the presenter for this particular segment of the training. So grab your coffee, sit back and enjoy. And like Crystal said, if there are any questions that you may have in reference to this presentation, you will have an opportunity to ask those questions at the end. Next slide, please. So I want to start off by giving you an overview, or at least go through the topics that we will be covering in this particular presentation. I always believe that the best way to start off any type of presentation is to address those definitions and or those terms that people may not be familiar with. And as long as we can come on the same page with the definition and how those terms will be utilized in this presentation, I think that you'll get a better understanding of how these terms apply to this particular presentation. Then when we're talking about subrecipients and contractors and your role, it's always best to understand how to determine one from the other. So we'll go over that aspect so you can understand one term associated from another. Then we'll get into the responsibilities of the pass-through entity. So I'll be probably calling it the pass-through entity, the prime grantee. But again, it's their responsibility for oversight for these particular sub-awards that they're actually making. Next slide, please. Then again, we'll get into the pre-award process. What all pass-through entities need to know in reference to that pre-award, how to determine what organizations are eligible for federal funding and certain risks associated with that process. Then we'll get into post-award process. Now we're talking about the subrecipient up running these particular programs, their responsibility with these federal funds, as well as your responsibility for oversight for these subrecipients. Next slide, please. And then what presentation wouldn't be complete without providing you some types of resources? So be assured that I do have some resources for you to take back to your agency. Next slide, please. So again, remember I said, let's start off with those definitions. Next slide. So what is a pass-through entity? And remember when I said I'll probably sometimes use the term prime recipient, main recipient, but for this presentation, the idea is that you're passing funds down a level. So when we're talking about a pass-through entity, we're talking about a non-federal entity that provides a sub-award to a subrecipient. And the key here is that they are carrying out an aspect of that federal grant program. This definition, as with all of the definitions, can be found in the Uniform Guidance to CFR 200, Section 1. Next slide, please. What is a subaward? Now, A subaward is an award that was provided by the pass-through entity to a subrecipient for the subrecipient. And again, the key is to carry out an aspect of that particular federal award. What I do want you to note is a subaward does not include payments to a contractor or to an individual that is a beneficiary of federal funds. And I'll give an example of what I mean by that. OJP does have a program where they provide funding for the spouses of falling police officers. So even though the funds are being passed through from the federal organization to the beneficiary, this does not represent a subaward. And again, contractors, when we're talking about procurement, that's a total different aspect of transferring funds down. Next slide, please. So now, what is a subrecipient? So now that subrecipient is that entity that receives that subaward from the pass-through entity. And then again, I really need to stress this, is that they are implementing or carrying out an aspect of that particular federal grant program. And I'll give you some examples later on throughout this presentation in order to get a feel for the difference between passing money down to a subrecipient as opposed to passing it down to a contractor. Next slide, please. So what is a contract? A contract is a legal instrument in which a non-federal entity will purchase either property or services that is needed for that particular grant project and or program. So again, we're passing money down, but again, it's a difference as to the work that's being done. So here I'm saying either property and or services, but I'll clarify services later on in this presentation because there may be, from the aspect of the work that's being done, a service that's being provided, but it's also an aspect of that particular grant. So I don't want you to misinterpret services as strictly being related to contracts. Now, the most important thing to remember is that although the terms and the language in a contract may be geared towards a contract, keep in mind that we're looking at the work that's actually being done. So although you've identified it as a contract, the Federal Awarding Agency, or OJP for this matter, may not look at it as a contract because it meets the definition of either a federal award or a subaward. Next slide, please. Real briefly, so what is a contractor? So naturally, the contractor is the entity that receives that contract, as I explained in the previous slide. Next slide. So now this process can be challenging. So a subrecipient versus a contractor and that determination and how to go about that process is what this next section will cover. Next slide. Keep in mind that determining whether an entity that is receiving funds is a subrecipient or a contractor may be blurry to a organization that's trying to make this determination, because in some cases it's not always straightforward. I guess if it was straightforward, then I wouldn't be doing this presentation. But again, I think that there are key factors that I will discuss later on that will guide you, or hopefully guide you in the right direction. There is no one single factor that identifies one relationship opposed to another, but there is one that I heavily lean on, and I'll explain it to you later in this presentation to give you a good idea of that's one of the questions that you want to ask in determining whether or not we're talking about a subrecipient and or a contractor. Now, the entity, to keep in mind that, and I'll show you a graph in this presentation, The entity that you're trying to make this determination on may possess characteristics on, I want to say, both sides of the spectrum. But again, I don't want to necessarily say, and some have said that if you have more checks on one side, then it has to be that as opposed to the other. But I always want you to thoroughly look at that. And then if you have concerns that you're not 100% sure, I encourage you always to reach out to the federal awarding agency for some additional guidance. Next slide, please. When we're talking about this determination, I am not concerned or primarily concerned with the form. And when I say the form, I'm talking about, let's say, the method of the contract. Are we talking about a memorandum of understanding? Are we talking about a contract? Are we talking about some type of partnership? Okay. I am less concerned with the legal instrument that you have created to establish this relationship. And I want you to be mindful that there always should be some form of legal instrument in order to establish that relationship so that both sides know what we're procuring or getting in business for and what that particular outcome should be. I am more concerned about the substance. What is actually being done? What is this agreement getting us to do? Is it getting us to purchase some type of equipment, or is it carrying out an aspect of that federal grant program? So I'm always concerned with the substance as opposed to the form. Next slide, please. OMB came up with a chart, which is before you, in order to give you some ground rules or a chart to use in order to determine whether or not I'm dealing with a contract or a subrecipient. So they have various types of checklists or things that you can ask yourself in reference to whether or not we're talking about a subrecipient and or contractor. The one that I just spoke about earlier that I want to say that I hang my head on in reference to, remember I said that they say that there's no one factor, but if you look at the subrecipient side, it says in accordance with the agreement, uses the federal funds to carry out a program for a public purpose specified in the authorizing statute. So again, remember, when I first started off, I kept talking about carrying out an aspect of that particular grant. If I can some way get back to this last section over here, I am more inclined to believe that we're talking about a subrecipient as opposed to a contractor. But I do want to bring your attention to language on the opposite side, contractor side. In the first one, it talks about provides goods and services, as well as in the second one and fourth one, okay? What I found that most entities have leaned more towards the service aspect of what's being done, and then just automatically deemed it or classified it as a contract. Give you an example of what I mean by this. There is an OJP award that an organization received in order to provide training, job placement, and mentoring to a group of youth that are at risk for joining gangs and doing other things with their lives. So this particular organization can do the training and job placement, but they lack the expertise of providing the mentoring services. So what they do is they go outside of their agency, find an organization that can provide the service to the grant program, but keep in mind that that is a part of that total grant program, that mentoring service. So those types of things are what I want you to be mindful of and not get distracted because you see the word service and think that automatically it is a contract as opposed to a subrecipient, which is why on the other side, subrecipient, the last one, I kind of hang my hat on that particular one because why? It's carrying out an aspect of that particular grant program. Next slide, please. So now the pass-through entity's responsibility. Next slide. So as a pass-through entity, what are your responsibilities for sub-awards or sub-recipients, okay? You're primarily concerned with making sure that the sub-awards are used in accordance to the grant guidelines, okay? So the best way to ensure that the subrecipient is aware of those guidance and compliance is that you're passing that information through the subaward document down to the subrecipient and make sure that they understand their requirements. I normally get questions about this, but let me explain to you why this is in here and why I want to make sure that you understand the responsibility of the pass-through entity. Overseeing the day-to-day operations of the subrecipient. So I am not saying that you need to set up a desk down at the subrecipient's organization and micromanage them. I am not saying that at all. But what I am saying is based on that document that you give to them in reference to their compliance on working on this particular grant program, you technically in a way have the day-to-day oversight, but hopefully it was conveyed in the documentation so that they know the reporting requirements, the drawdown requirements, and how best to go about implementing that grant program. And in the event that they have any concerns or questions about that, they know where to go in order to get answers to that. And the other thing that you want to make sure is that they are operating or implementing this grant program according to the budget that they submitted to you. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about the responsibilities, we're also talking about, and those guidelines for the subrecipients to be mindful of various types of timelines. So whether we're talking about submission of documents, reporting requirements, and again, I talked about payments, what type of payment process that your organization will allow them to utilize. So whether we're talking about strictly a reimbursement or even possibly some form of an advance, they know all of these requirements and how to meet those reporting requirements. So when we're talking about reporting requirements, let me give you an idea of things that you have to put in place to ensure that you're getting the information in a timely manner so that you can submit the report to the federal agency. So as you know that the financial reports are due within 30 days. So we give you 30 days after the end of the calendar quarter. I just don't think that you can allow your subrecipients that much time in order to get that information to you so that you can also report to the federal organization. So there has to be some type of understanding or limitation set with you for the subrecipient that maybe within 20 days or maybe 25 days, they get this information to you so that you can compile the report and get it back to the federal agency in a timely manner. And most of all, remember what I said, that if there's anything going sideways down at the subrecipient, it is your responsibility to get them back on track to ensure that they're implementing that grant program properly. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about the pre-award process from your perspective. Next slide. So when I think about the pre-award process, the pass-through entity has to have established policy and procedures on the entire life cycle of a sub-award. So that means that how sub-awards will be made, what type of eligibility requirements that you will be looking for that the possible applicant knows, and the selection process and how long that's going to take. All of that needs to be in policy and procedures because that's the framework that you are working on in reference to looking at making and oversight for sub-awards. Next slide, please. So now, again, with the pre-award process, this first bullet, I highly recommend it, okay? There is nothing in the uniform guidance that says that a pass-through entity must do a risk assessment at the pre-award stage. Here's why I say I highly recommend it, because sometimes if you do a little work up front, you can determine whether or not a potential applicant or subrecipient poses any problems with that particular award. There could be financial issues with that particular organization. You may be able to find that they had issues with reporting requirements. You stand a better chance of knowing that up front, putting any types of conditions in place at the part where you're issuing that sub-award, as opposed to 6 months into the sub-award, now you find out that there is a reporting problem or other issues with this particular entity. By doing that, like I said, it gives you an idea of what's going on with this agency. Some of the things that you can look at is previous audit findings. When I talk about audit findings with subrecipients, I'm talking about those cross-cutting issues. So for example, when I say cross-cutting issues, is there something in their audit that will overflow or overlap your federal program? A program-specific finding in the audit probably wouldn't do that. But if there's an issue with their accounting system that was noted with, say, for example, a HHS grant, 9 times out of 10, they're going to have that same accounting system problem with your particular grant. So you want to look at those cross-cutting issues, whether or not they have any history of performance with your agency or other federal agencies. And again, always, are they eligible and they understand that up front? Next slide, please. Now let's get into the post-award requirements. Next slide. And here you will be required to perform a risk assessment, okay? Now here, this risk assessment that you're doing is looking at various types of attributes to ensure that you come up with some type of system to place grantees in various types of high, low, and medium risk. By doing this, it will provide you with the information to determine whether or not you need to go look at a particular organization, or whether or not, like I said, they pose any types of risk to the federal agency. Now, with me being financial, I do lean more heavily towards those financial attributes or factors. But keep in mind, programmatic elements need to be taken into consideration as well. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at those attributes and developing a risk assessment for your subrecipients, some of the factors that you can look at, and this list here is not all inclusive, but it'll give you an idea of where possibly certain scores will land on this risk assessment factor. So the first one talks about confidential funds or cash on hand. There is always a high probability of theft with cash being housed in your particular organization. Yes, it could be in a safe under lock and key, but there's still a potential, a higher potential of cash being mismanaged or theft because it's right there within your organization. So as you can see, I'm considering that to be a 3 or a high level risk. Subawards that are under $25,000. I have it as a low risk only for this reason. So I want you to understand why I consider it a low risk in this particular example. This organization that receives federal funds normally receives federal funds in excess of $500,000 or $1 million. So a $25,000 grant, I'm not going to say it's something that you ignore, but it's something that you probably do not have to spend a lot of time on because of the threshold of that particular sub-award. And then delinquent reports, okay? One delinquent report, okay, but when you start getting into two, you may want to now start focusing your attention as to why this is happening, because it could lead into other issues if not addressed in a timely manner. So the deal is this risk assessment with its factors helps you develop a monitoring plan based on those factors and where they lie on the high, low, medium range. Will give you an idea, or at least help you to find ways to mitigate the risk of that particular sub-award. Next slide, please. So now, even with post-award process and the risk assessment, those attributes should provide the basic information that you need to help you to create a monitoring plan. Keep in mind, when we're talking about a monitoring plan, there's nothing in the uniform guidance that says that in order to monitor subrecipients, or any recipient for that matter, it has to be on site, okay? So the deal is there should be multiple methods that you can use in order to look at your subrecipients to make sure that things are operating as well as possible. So again, while this process, again, is not all inclusive, okay, because once you're doing your risk assessment annually, because some subawards come off of your portfolio as you're adding new ones in, again, it should be a starting point of assessing agencies to determine whether or not your organization has to be mindful of the funds that's being passed to this particular organization. Next slide, please. All right, so now let's talk about the subrecipient monitoring process. Next slide. Again, remember what I just said, that the pass-through entity should have an annual monitoring plan, and it's of all subrecipients within their portfolio. And again, we're looking at some range, so whether or not you use an alphabet scale or numbering scale, somewhere along the line, you should be able to get to this high, medium, and low range. Again, remember what I said, there's no requirement that all site visits have to be on site, okay? You can do an in-house review, and again, according to the, as a result of the current state that we're in reference to the pandemic, there are not many, if any, on-site reviews being done at this particular time. So by doing, whether we're talking about an on-site and or desk review, based on the questions that you ask and the information that you receive, it should be able to let you know whether or not there's any issues down at the subrecipient level, and hopefully the technical assistance that you can provide them to get them back on track. And in some cases, it may mean that the subrecipient needs to attend some type of training, whether it's housed at your particular organization or something that your organization offers, or some other type of training facility. Next slide. So when preparing for a review, and I'm talking, I want to say both, so whether we're talking about a desk review and or on-site review, there are certain things that you want to look at. The subrecipient application, okay, so What did they apply for? What did they say that they were going to do? You want to look at their financial reports and their progress reports. Are they on target to meet the objectives? Have they overspent the award with still a lot of work left to be done on this particular program? And then look at their drawdown history. Are they drawing down consistently? Are they drawing down what appears to be too much or not enough? And I give an example of one situation where I saw where they were not drawing down enough money. So based on the salaries and wages on this particular grant program, along with those fringe benefits, it looked like that they had drew down like 80% of the award in salaries. And I want to say only 15% of fringe benefits. So that required an investigation to see what was going on, because again, it could have just been an oversight on the agency's part. And then again, like I said, you always want to look at those audit reports, because those audit reports can tell you a lot about a particular organization. Next slide. I list here a couple best practices for when we're doing site visits. You always want to notify the sub-recipient that you need to come out and look at their particular program. So you don't want to catch them off guard or anything like that, or have them feel that you don't trust them or stuff like that. So you always want to notify them so that the people that need to be on site when you arrive are actually there. You always want to have an interest conference, go over again why we're here, what we're going to be looking at, and hopefully the outcome that, there's no issues, because if you've done any review of certain documentations prior to going out and it didn't lead you to anything, then hopefully that review or that time spent with them, hopefully again will reveal nothing. So again, you're going to look at supporting documentation, analyze this information, for one, to make sure that they're following their agency's policy and procedures. So for example, if it takes 2 signatures in order for a check to be signed and mailed out the door, you want to make sure that they're following their process. You shouldn't see a check that only has 1 signature if their policy and procedure says that there has to be 2. And then the exit conference. What you found, you want to be forthcoming with them. Here's what we found. Here's what was addressed while we were on site. Here's what still needs to be addressed. So follow-up, what type of follow-up, how long are you going to give them to follow up with you to get that information to you through that corrective action plan? And then once the corrective action plan has been accepted, then you can close out that particular site visit. So again, these are just best practices. There could be other steps incorporated in here, but I think these 7 are a good, framework for some of the things that you want to look at when you're dealing with sub-awards. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about the remedies for sub-recipients non-compliance. Next slide. I get calls from time to time in reference to, the sub-recipient isn't conforming with the policy and procedures. They are, going back and forth with me with certain things. So how do I get them to do what it is that they need to do? I want to go back to the sub-award agreement. There must be as much detail in the sub-award agreement that hopefully some of these issues will not arise. And I'll give you an example of one thing. I'm not sure how the sub-recipient received my telephone number, got a hold of my telephone number, but I had a sub-recipient call me and said that she asked me about the 10% rule, and the 10% rule allows you to move money between approved budget categories without prior approval. But on the sub-award, the pass-through entity put 5%, that they can only move 5% between approved budget categories. So when I explained the 10% rule, the person on the other line said, I thought that was the case, but this agency told me that I was only allowed 5%. So I said, so right then and there, I knew I was talking to a sub-recipient. So I asked, I said, well, was that language in the agreement? And the person told me yes. So I said, did you sign off on that agreement, agreeing to that? And the person said, yes. So I told the person, there's nothing that I can do for you. You know, the only way that you're going to get the 10% as identified in the financial guide is you have to be a direct recipient with the Department of Justice. So again, you want to make sure that the agreement is well written and puts your agency at the best defense on some things that can go wrong. So if you still can't get the subrecipient to comply, you can temporarily withhold funds for those question costs. You can disallow all or part of that particular activity until that compliance comes into being corrected. Wholly or partly terminate the subaward, suspend or debarment, or deny, well, I don't want to say deny, but withhold future fundings until there is some type of understanding. Here is the thing, that even though that you have some of these remedies at your disposal, you just can't automatically turn them on. You have to give the subrecipient a time frame or process in order to correct those deficiencies before you, and I use this term, drop the hammer on them, okay? So, but these are some of the things that you can do, but make sure that it's because you exhausted all of your resources with the subrecipient and they're still non-compliant. Next slide, please. So let's talk about closeouts, because again, we make the award, they're implementing the award program, and now it's time to close it out. Next slide. So the pass-through entity may approve extensions, more time to do the work, especially if certain types of factors have happened that cause the subrecipient a delay in implementing that particular grant program. But keep this in mind, you cannot extend them or give them more time outside of your grant timeline, okay? So to give you an example, let's just say, and I'm just as an example, let's just say that your award is from January to December. You make a sub-award in February and you give them to October, okay? If because of delays, you allow them until November to get it done, you can do that. I would be very cautious about allowing them in December, okay? Because that's when you need to wrap up things or make sure that you're ready to close out. So again, as long as it's within your time frame, you can do that. To close out a sub-award is when all things have been done, it's complete, the work has been done, then you can start the closeout process. Require the subrecipient to submit all financial, performance, and other reports to you by the specified time frame, okay? And again, remember I talked about that review of evaluating the subrecipient is still going on, even in the closeout process. How timely are they getting you this information? Next slide. So with that, remember what I said, that I will provide you with some resources in order to take back to your organization to go through, just as a method of reinforcing the things that I talked about today. Next slide. The 2 CFR 200 is always a good document. The only thing that I want to be mindful with you with this particular document is it's actually designed to cut across all federal agencies. So if you want more specific information about your particular program, I then now suggest the DOJ Financial Guide. And then just as a source document that I would like for you to review, not saying that your internal control policies are outdated or need help, but I think that these are two good documents that you can look at that will help you build what I want to say, that strong internal control foundation. Next slide. So with that, that ends my presentation. I hope it's been helpful for you, and enjoy the rest of the presentation.
All right. Thank you, Michael, for all that great information. let's actually move to our polling question. And we want to ask you, which of the pass-through requirements shared by Michael would you be interested in receiving additional training and technical assistance in? So these were the main components of Michael's presentation. Which of these areas would you be interested in receiving training and technical assistance in? This would be helpful for the TFC. So thank you for responses. Take a few moments to submit your response. Your pre-award risk assessment, post-award risk assessment, sub-recipient monitoring, remedies for non-compliance, and closeout requirements. And if there's an area that's not listed here, feel free to enter that in the chat. So we'll take another moment, actually. So here are the results. The most frequent response was sub-recipient monitoring, okay? And then we had pre-award risk assessment, post-award risk assessment. So that's helpful for us as we're providing support in this particular area of financial and grants management.
Hey everyone, thank you Russ, and thank you Carlin. My name is Francis Mendez and I'm going to talk about some of the resources we have. Next slide. All right, so in the chat, you should see a guide sheet and a job aid checklist that we've prepared for you as a resource. Next slide. Also, after we complete these webinar series, we're going to be sending you a summary report that has the highlights and key takeaways from the webinar. That's a resource you can use as a best reference or share with your colleagues. Next slide. So one of the events that we're working on next is a peer discussion webinar on procurement that will be held in December, and it's opportunity for grantees to learn from each other. And we're going to ask you some poll questions. Whenever we're ready, next slide. So the topic that we're going to focus on is procurement, because that is kind of #1 topic when we surveyed Youth Virgin Island grantees. Those are the ones you said you want to hear more about. So whenever we're ready, if we can pull up the survey. All right, so what areas of procurement would you like to learn for or discuss with other grantees? Bidding and selection process, documentation of procurement proceedings, preparing a sole source justification, implementing strong monitoring procedures for contracts. If you would like us to cover another topic, please enter it in the chat box. This is helpful to us because it will help us prepare and shape the focus of the next webinar, which will focus on peer sharing. All right, so we pretty much have each of the topics equally selected. All right, let's go to the next poll question. Thank you, everyone. The next poll question is, would you be interested or willing to share your experience regarding procurement during the peer discussion webinar? If you are interested, you can put your name in the chat or email us and reach out to us. If you are happy to join and listen, great. And if you would like to hear more, you could put your name in the chat or contact information or email us, and we'll be happy to provide more information. Couple of seconds. All right, thank you for participating. Next slide. So I'm now going to turn it over to Jamil, who's going to talk about next steps and close this out. Jamil, thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you, Francis. So yeah, let's talk about the next steps. Let's go to the next slide. Great, thank you. So please take a few moments to complete our webinar evaluation survey, which is linked in the chat below, or you can scan the QR code with your mobile device. You can do that just by opening your camera and just pointing it at the QR code on your screen and clicking the link there. To contact the Virtual Support Center or the VSC, you can email us at ojptfsc@usdoj.gov. Response to email inquiries usually take about 24 hours within the next business day. You can also schedule a consultation call with the financial specialist with the details provided in the chat. So check out our website at ojp.gov/TFSC and sign up for our listserv with the details linked in the chat below. Also, our next event, Learning Exchange Training Series number 3, peer discussion webinar procurement will be held in December 2021, and that date is coming soon. And also that link for that registration can be found in the chat. All right, so on behalf of the OJP TFSC, I would like to thank the presenters and the attendees for a great session. And just a reminder to please complete that evaluation for the session using the link provided in the chat. Have a good day, and I hope you've enjoyed the session. You may now disconnect.